Security Breach Ruin presented the FNAF community with a lot of questions, and I've been trying to answer them. But one surprising one that I didn't think I'd still have after Security Breach was, where the hell is Vanny? In that game, it seemed like she was just underutilized, but in Ruin, I expected to see her at least a little bit. But then I thought I understood why she wasn't here. Assuming the Princess Quest ending is canon, Vanessa, Gregory, and Freddy's head should have been out of the building way before it ever collapsed. But if that's true, then why is there Vanny graffiti all over the ruins of the Pizzaplex? That's what we're here today to solve. So slices, put on your aprons, and let's bake ourselves a theory. Let's start with where we last saw Vanessa, Security Breach. Her fate is heavily dependent on which ending actually brings us to Ruin. But what are those fates? Well, there's three main themes. The first that happens in the bad alleyway ending is that she's alive and well. We see Vanny survive and presumably keep working under Glitch Trap. The second theme is Vanny being confirmed dead. It's the outcome we see in the fire escape ending and the disassemble Vanny ending. Not a great track record so far, but there is one more theme we see in the Save Vanny ending, where Vanessa seemingly is freed of Vanny's influence because of the Princess Quest machine, and her, Gregory, and Freddy's head leave the Pizzaplex for good. Now, I hear you. I said that all the endings fit in those three themes, but I lied. I lied for dramatic effect. I'll do it again. Anyway, the other two endings just don't give us any information about Vanny whatsoever. The Van ending and the Burn Trap ending don't show her even a little bit, so I guess she's probably fine. That's where she is at the end of Security Breach, but what about Ruin? That's actually where we run into our major problem. A problem like not checking out my second channel, Rytoost, where highly edited gameplay videos get posted, like my part 1 of Ruin playthrough, my part 1 of My Friendly Neighborhood playthrough. You should go click link right there. Thank you very much for supporting it. Thank you. Anyway, like I said in the opener, at first this tracks with what we know about Ruin. Looking at the comic pages, Gregory seems to have invented all of these endings. The alley, the van, my favorite, the fire escape, disassemble Vanny, burn trap, all except for one, save Vanny. That's the only ending not drawn by Gregory. But that's not all. We get to see two of the Princess Quest arcade machines, both of them off, one of them toppled on its side with an AR golden sword stuck into it. Even more than that, when we encounter Freddy in Phaser Blast, assuming he is the same one, he's on a pile of staff bots in the same location with the exact same damage on his chest. Also missing his head. Like, everything here points to the Save Vanny Princess Quest ending being canon, which lines up with what we see in Ruin. Vanessa, Gregory, and Freddy's head are nowhere to be found in this Pizzaplex. They're no longer here. They left before everything collapsed. There shouldn't be any traces of Vanessa or Gregory left in that Pizzaplex. At least no traces that are on the ruined part of it, but there are. The first functional staff bot we see, Mask Bot, that gives us the Vanny mask, has been carved and bent into having rabbit ears. Some of the mini music men have been modified to look like little rabbits. Now, sure, this could just be the influence of Afton, he is the rabbit guy after all, but what about Vanny specifically? Something only she would do. In a lot of spots of this ruined collapsed Pizzaplex, there's graffiti, but specifically graffiti depicting Vanny. Graffiti that could have only been put there after the Pizzaplex collapsed. So is Vanny out of the picture or isn't she? Did the Princess Quest machine even get beaten? Is that even the canon ending? Well, it is, but I don't think it's the only one. Let's look at what these comic pages mean to us. Does their existence necessitate that whatever they're depicting never happened? I'm not so sure. The game does tell us that Gregory created all of these, but look at the Burn Trap comic page. We have a very clear and specific drawing of Burn Trap and the Tangle, the new canon name for the Blob. It was in the file, so we officially know what the canon name is. And thank God, because it's way better than the Blob. Specifically from that ending. If we are to assume that this ending didn't happen, then this scene wouldn't have happened either. But the Tangle is real. We see it ourselves with our own eyes at the beginning of Ruin. So it's not like he created the idea of the Tangle. He must have seen it. The problem is, in Security Breach, if you've seen the Tangle, that means you've done the Burn Trap ending. To get there, you go down a one-way elevator shaft, and then a one-way hole in the ground, then you see the Tangle. If Gregory saw the Tangle, the only way to keep going was further down, implying he would have then met Burn Trap and done that boss fight. And if he did the boss fight, that would imply that the Tangle then took Burn Trap away, and we see Freddy and Gregory escape to a hill somewhere. So is that what happens here? Well, I don't think that makes much sense either, because of what Gregory knows and because of Freddy. Freddy is the most apparent issue here. Even though he now has that prototype stamp on his foot, he is in the exact same position with the exact same damage to his shell. I don't see any reason for this to not be our Freddy. So if we see Freddy here, then he couldn't have been here. Second, in the Burn Trap ending, Gregory beats Burn Trap, then him and Freddy run out of the Pizzaplex immediately and leave there for good. That's fine, we don't see Gregory in Ruin. Him not being at the Pizzaplex makes sense. But in Ruin, he knows about the Mimic, and he knows about Mexus, and all this information that he wouldn't be privy to unless he was in that basement for a while. So he would have had to be down there for longer or have learned it from somebody else. Speaking of someone else, where's Vanessa this whole time? We technically don't have any information whatsoever on Vanessa or Vanny and her whereabouts in the Ruin DLC. There's no evidence of her existing. So does that mean Steelwool and Scott have just moved on from her entirely? I don't think so, because while we don't have evidence of her being here, we have a lot of evidence of her influence over the area. The Vanny styled graffiti, the Vanny mask, the rabbit animatronics. I mentioned previously that while yes, rabbits are primarily a William Afton thing, Vanny herself was very obsessed with rabbits as his follower. But furthermore than that, what could Afton do in the physical world realistically? At least after the collapse of the Pizzaplex. The only piece of this game that I can figure could be influenced at all by Glitchtrap or William Afton in any way would be the Mimic or Helpy, presumably Glitchtrap. And the Mimic is trapped in the basement, and Helpy is in the AR world. Nobody here could do graffiti or physically modify animatronics, especially since the main Glamrock seem to not be affected by the Glitchtrap virus anymore. They would need physical help. It's why they called Cassie down there in the first place. So if there is rabbit-themed mischief all over the Pizzaplex before Cassie gets there but after the collapse, what gives? How is Vanny still here if Vanessa left? Well, Tales from the Pizzaplex book coming out in October might just have our answer. For those who are unaware, in the first week or so of October, we're scheduled to get the final book in the Tales from the Pizzaplex series, or at least the final book currently announced, Tales from the Pizzaplex number 8, B7-2. And like most of the books that's come out for the series, folks got their hands on it early and started leaking things pretty much immediately. It has a lot of information about the games, especially FNAF 4, which we will get into at some point, trust me. But one of those big bits of information comes from the sequel of B7. Now, I haven't covered B7 on this channel because I personally really don't like the story. The author has come out and admitted there was no malice or intent or anything like that. Accidentally or not, B7 has some really transphobic themes in it, and I do not want to cover it on the channel. Luckily, I don't even really have to talk about the plot or characters of B7 for what we're here for today. As with the previous book series in the franchise, the most important information here is the rules of the universe we're working in. Like in the Silver Eyes, I don't think the Silver Eyes happened one for one with the games. That's pretty much impossible at this point. Some things might have carried over, but rules like how Remnant works in the universe, very important, something we learned from the books. And likewise, something really important happens in B7 too. The first time I actually saw this mentioned was by GGY or Zarek5 on Twitter, where they went into the repercussions of B7 2. In that story, once our main character Billy finally snaps, he develops this different, strange, not himself personality. But in this sequel, we learn that he's able to separate from that personality as long as it has a vessel of its own, leaving him wholly separated from that darker version of himself. Zarek then extended that logic to Vanessa and Gregory, and I think he's right. But what would that mean for the story? Well, let's look back to Ruin. We get to see the two arcade machines that most likely held onto the lock on the minds of Gregory and Vanessa, Balloon World and Princess Quest. Quick catch up for you non-book readers. It's very likely that before the events of Security Breach, Gregory was actually working with Vanny as Patient 46 under the moniker GGY. For evidence, go to this video. And just as Vanessa's mind was locked inside the Princess Quest arcade machine, it's very likely that Gregory's mind was locked inside the Balloon World arcade machine in the daycare. Check this video for evidence. Anyway, back to it. We know that after you beat the third Princess Quest machine, the rabbit creature screams out and Vanessa is seemingly freed of Vanny, leaving the mask on the ground. I knew with all these ideas going on there was some kind of connection here, but I wanted some kind of other tangible evidence. And that's when I was talking to my thumbnail artist Barbadroid, and he mentioned that if you look at the arcade machines Princess Quest and Balloon World, there's this particle effect of something floating out of it, as if something recently left the machine. These, as far as I'm aware, are the only arcade machines that do believe this. And then it all fell into place. So bake with me for a moment as I lay out exactly what possibly happened in the lead up to Ruin. Just before Security Breach, either the conscious mind of Gregory or somebody else entirely beat the Balloon World arcade machine. This took GGY out of Gregory and returned it to the Afton-controlled arcade machine, leaving Gregory conscious but groggy and confused. It must have felt like he woke up from a very long sleep just before the game starts, his memories slowly returning. This is why Gregory struggles with his own name right at the beginning of the game. Then by the end of it, he beats Princess Quest, doing that same service to Vanessa, freeing her. Now recently freed, the three of them leave the Pizzaplex off to better things and try to forget all of this that ever happened. All is not well at the Pizzaplex. From their perspective, those times are behind them. All the personas created under the Mimic 1 or Glitch Trap virus have been destroyed. They're long gone and the Mimic is trapped deep under the Pizzaplex. It's all good, but they didn't kill the infection. They just removed it from themselves. GGY and Vanny are still at the Pizzaplex. Their personality, their mannerisms, they just need new hosts. GGY being free a bit longer than Vanny was gave it a head start. And if it was personally created to serve the Mimic and even called itself his favorite apprentice, of course it would go to it. And if GGY went to the Mimic, there's a high probability that this personality infected it, just as it did Gregory. After all, the Mimic is trying its hardest to recreate Gregory to trick Cassie. It would make a lot of sense if it got a head start by absorbing this GGY personality. But then that still leaves Vanny still stuck inside the Princess Quest arcade machine. She also needs a vessel, so it's no mistake that GGY, as the Mimic, calls Cassie to the building and gives her the Vanny mask. Sure, the Mimic needs Cassie to deactivate the security nodes to free it, but throughout the game, it's testing Cassie and beginning to turn her into the perfect vessel for Vanny, and the Brazil ending is its final resolution. This feels really solid with the context that the books are giving us, and it tracks thematically with what we've had in the past. Traumatic event breaks into a remnant version and agony version of that person. Now its traumatic event breaks into the darker and normal side of their personalities. It thematically tracks with what we've had in the past. But what do you think? Security Breach was weird in a lot of ways. Like, putting the glitches aside, the plot and villains presented were used in strange manners, Vanny being one of the weirdest. I mean, we got a tease for her in Help Wanted, and the trailer set her up as the major villain for the game, and you get there and she's barely there at all. Not to mention by the end of Security Breach, it seems like Vanny's going to be gone forever, but I don't think she is. Now, I just made a video on the future of FNAF where I touch on this subject, but I kind of glossed over Vanny for the sake of that video, and some people were understandably confused. So I thought a video like this discussing Vanny and where she's gone made sense. Granted, I made a video like this about a year and a half ago, but that was right after Ruin came out, and since then we've gotten Help Wanted 2, and Help Wanted 2 really blew this whole thing wide open, especially because I've noticed something that I don't think anybody's brought up before. So Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. So who is Vanny? Well, from Help Wanted, we meet a character named Vanessa. We first hear her voice at the end of the Curse of Dreadbear DLC, if you've collected 2 specific items. The first one you get by achieving one of the endings of the base game, the one where you collect all the tapes, follow the instructions on the tapes, face off against Glitch Trap, and do what you were told. And then you wake up in a room locked with a metal door, Glitch Trap sliding a window open to shush you and fade into nothingness. But after that ending in the lobby, Glitch Trap no longer appears. Instead, a plushie of Glitch Trap is next to the desk. The other item you get from the secret in the corn maze from the Curse of Dreadbear DLC. In the corn maze, there's 4 gates and 4 keys. You collect a key, exit that marked gate, and win. But if you collect all 4 keys, a 5th secret key spawns in. Once you collect that and make it back to the center of the arena, there's this hidden win condition. Inside is a wood-carved Vanny mask. After you have both items, if, in the lobby, you put on the Vanny mask and stare at the Glitch Trap plushie, you get this audio.
Yes, I hear you. I know. No. There's no miscommunication. I understand. Yes, I have it. I made it myself. I think you would like it. No one suspects anything. Don't worry. I'll be ready. And I won't let you down. It will be fun.
And that's the first time we ever heard Vanessa or Vanny's voice. We know from playing through Help Wanted that Glitchtrap is trying to take over the mind of a human, and from this secret it seems like he was successful in taking over Vanessa's mind to create Vanny. But in Help Wanted we don't know her name is Vanessa, because that's where the information from Help Wanted ends, and where the information from FNAF Special Delivery begins, the AR mobile app that was basically Pokemon Go for animatronics. You can't play it anymore, and many of the emails that were planned to be released never actually saw the light of day, but luckily, thanks to the wiki and this very helpful website made by Underscore, we can still read those emails, which is great because they're filled with lore, especially about Vanessa. According to her in-office stalker, she seemed to have two different distinct personalities. One of them was a kind Vanessa who would ask you how your day was and was Googling cookie recipes. The other version of her was standoffish, ignored everybody, and would stare at her screen incredibly closely, and also Google torture methods and things like that on the company computer, which is a quick way to get flagged by HR, but luckily, I guess, her stalker works in HR, so she didn't get fired. This is the first instance we get a peek into how Vanessa and Vanny work, but that gets illuminated and expanded on in Security Breach. In the next game, we get the security guard Vanessa, who was put there through management even though she's not qualified, and somehow was the only human employee who wasn't fired and replaced with a staff bot. Throughout the game, Vanessa is trying to capture Gregory and put him into the Lost and Found to hold him for the police or his parents to get him. But we also get Vanny, this mysterious rabbit lady who just prances around and chases Gregory. If she gets her hands on him, it's unclear what happens because the jump scare ends the game, and we know that it's the end of the line for Gregory, but we don't know if she just straight up kills us or kidnaps us and brings us to the basement. It's unclear. But these jump scares aside, we get a lot more information for how Vanny and Vanessa work. For one, Vanny is completely hidden from Glamrock Freddy until he gets the upgraded eyes, when he can then see her. We also see in one of the endings that Vanny seems to be Vanessa. We'll come back to that later. But the majority of the information we get is about Vanessa from the therapy CDs. There's a collection of CDs throughout Security Breach that chronicle the therapy sessions of what seem to be two patients. One of them is Vanessa, and people speculate on who the other is. Some people believe it to be Vanny, some people believe it to be Gregory. I think it's more likely to be Gregory while he's taken under control by Glitchtrap. That's a theory for another day. Regardless, the therapy CDs that are definitely about Vanessa tell us more and more about Vanessa, and doubles down on the idea that Vanessa seems to be living a sort of double life. Even Vanessa herself saying,
I compartmentalized him. He's locked away.
In that moment, the therapist thinks she's talking about the grief she feels towards her dad, but the player knows that she's actually referring to Glitchtrap. Somehow, whatever tried to take over her mind didn't fully do it. She managed to compartmentalize it into a section of her mind, splitting herself into two identities, Vanessa and Vanny. And now that Vanny is in Vanessa's mind, Glitchtrap can tell Vanny to do what he wants. Just like I can tell you to please hit that subscribe button because it really helps out my channel, thank you. So is Vanessa Vanny? Well, yes and no. On one hand, yes, because during all of these games, Vanessa seems to be at least partially controlled by either Vanny or Glitchtrap. And going back to the fire escape ending, we see when the mask of Vanny is removed, there's something that looks exactly like Vanessa under it. Now, I hear you. In that very same ending, we then pan up to show Vanessa in a security guard outfit looking sadly on the scene below. So wouldn't that be showing us that there's two different people here? It is up to interpretation. I lean on no, because if you look at the Vanessa on the roof of this building, she's literally surrounded by and likely on fire, yet she's calmly and sadly watching the scene below. To me, this is showing us Vanessa's ghost, lamenting what became of her life, because if not, then Vanessa really needs to pay attention to her environment because she's on fire and she seems to not notice. So if Vanny is Vanessa, why did I say yes and no? Well, Vanny seems to be within Vanessa's body, but Vanny does seem to be a completely separate person with a separate mind. Whatever Glitchtrap did to Vanessa doesn't seem to be just taking over Vanessa's mind and making Vanessa do what Glitchtrap wants. Instead, it seems like he created a brand new personality and attempted to upload it to Vanessa's brain, almost as if Vanny is just a digital consciousness that's possessing the body of Vanessa. Alright, so that's what I think Vanny is and how it works within Vanessa's body. But then the question is begged, what happens to Vanny after Security Breach? Because the different endings of Security Breach breach all spell different outcomes for Vanny and Vanessa, so we need to figure out which one of these endings is canon. Immediately, it is unclear and speculative to say which one, but I believe with the evidence we have, the most likely option is the Princess Quest ending, otherwise known as the good Vanny ending. Basically, throughout the game you find these Princess Quest arcade machines. If you beat the first one, it unlocks the ability to play the second. So if you beat both machines and find Vanny's hideout during a playthrough, when attempting to leave the Pizzaplex, you're presented with the option to confront Vanny. If you do so and make it into her lair, you have two options. You could either turn all the robots against Vanny, having them kill her brutally in front of Gregory and leave, or you can attempt to play Princess Quest 3, of which if you beat it, it shows an error sign, all the robots turn off, and the Vanny mask is left behind. We've seemingly freed Vanessa from Vanny's control, and we've freed Glamrock Freddy's head from his destroyed body, and the three of them leave together. There's a few reasons to why this ending seems the most likely. For one, in Ruin we get comic drawings by Gregory of every other ending in the game, except for this ending, which seems to imply that the other endings are imaginations of Gregory on what could have happened. But that isn't quite solid, because from the beginning of Ruin, we know that the blob is a real thing, yet Gregory draws the blob in his Burn Trap ending. So just because he drew it doesn't mean it didn't happen. But we know the Burn Trap ending couldn't have happened because in Ruin, his pod and room are fine, not crumbling and burnt. So the comic pages are a whole question mark, but luckily there's other evidence to go off of here. In Help Wanted 2, Princess Quest 4 is playable, and that's important because so far every Princess Quest arcade machine has needed you to play the previous one to unlock the ability to play the current one. We couldn't play Princess Quest 3 without beating 2, couldn't play 2 without beating 1, so if we can play 4, it's implied that 3 has been beaten. Not to mention in Ruin, we see 3 on its side with a sword stabbed through it in the digital space, which feels like it's been conquered. Furthermore, in both the good and bad Vanny ending, Glamrock Freddy is demolished and destroyed and left for dead in Phaser Blast. But only in the good Vanny ending do we take his still operable head and leave the Pizzaplex. And what do we find in Ruin? A destroyed and discarded Glamrock Freddy without a head in Phaser Blast. Literally with similar markings on the chest and in a similar location that we see in the cutscene. Not to mention, in the good Vanny ending, the mask is visibly left behind, and we know by Ruin that mask is available to use unless there's multiple. With this huge pile of evidence, I think it's incredibly likely that the good Vanny ending is the canon ending for Security Breach. But if that's true, then Vanny's gone, right? The mask was left behind, Princess Quest was beaten, Vanessa is clearly free from Vanny's influence, so what's the issue? Well, just because Vanessa is free from Vanny doesn't mean Vanny's destroyed. And to explain how that could work, we need to talk about one of the books from Tales from the Pizzaplex, namely the stories B7 and B7-2. And admittedly, I have some beef with these stories, so we're just gonna do a very quick summary and not go into the details. Basically, a boy named Billy convinces himself that he's an animatronic, so he begins to pretend to be an animatronic and pays people to graft and replace body parts of his with animatronic parts to become an animatronic. But by the end of the story, he realizes he's made a huge mistake, he regrets it, and he throws himself into a trash compactor. In the beginning of the next story, B7-2, he wakes up in a hospital. Somebody found him and brought him there, and the doctors, while saving his life, managed to remove all of the animatronic parts from Billy's body, and he's back to just being Billy again. But those animatronic parts came off in one large chunk, and that one large chunk is still operable and still has the B7 personality, the personality Billy had when he believed he was an animatronic. B7 wants to re-merge with Billy and become whole again, and to do so, it tries to trick the grandmother into letting it merge with her. Lo and behold, we find at the end of the story, the grandma knew what was happening and was tricking B7 to merge with her because she knew she was going to die very soon from just terminal illness. So she forces B7 to complete the merge with her to become one with B7 and then dies so that B7 dies with her. And it works. So that's a crazy story. But the important thing to note here is if B7 as a separate personality functions like Vanny does, we now know how Vanny works. Vanny is a separate personality that can be removed from its host without being destroyed. Seemingly, the only way to destroy Vanny, like B7, is to merge it with a host, and while merged, destroy the host it's merged to. The only time we see something like this happen is in the fire escape ending, when while Vanny is active, she falls off the Pizzaplex and Vanessa dies, which is the only time we see Vanessa's ghost, if that is Vanessa's ghost.
host, which could be explaining this scene. This is the only time it actually destroyed Vanny. Well, that and the bad Vanny ending, but we don't stick around to find out. But if the good Vanny ending happened, then Vanessa wasn't killed. Vanny was removed from Vanessa, and then the mask was left behind. So even though Vanessa is freed, Vanny is still active and capable. And if B7 is to be believed, Vanny is then going to be looking for a new host. So who's next? The first time I made a video about this exact topic, I thought it was Cassie, because I made it right after Ruin, and I still think that eventually gets there. But since then we've gotten Help Wanted 2, and this is where the theory blows wide open, and where I legitimately think we've solved a major chunk of Help Wanted 2, the Princess Quest 4 ending, one of the most confusing parts about the entire game. I believe Help Wanted 2's protagonist is Cassie's dad, and I feel like most people agree with that. We know from Help Wanted 2 he's using the Vanny mask to try and figure out what's going on in the Pizzaplex and complete his tasks. We also know that this game takes place at least during and after Security Breach, based on what we can see while playing the game. In this game, we also see Vanny. Not only that, but in early builds of the game, it seems as though Vanny was going to be whispering us instructions from out of sight. However, to be fair, that's removed, so we don't know exactly how it was going to be implemented, and it's not in the final game, so it shouldn't be mentioned as hard evidence, but it's good to bring up to show what headspace the developers were in. In this game, there are two endings, one of them showing Vanny and the other one not. In the first ending, if you just play the game as normal and complete every minigame, you eventually get this cutscene, where it seems as though we're looking at Glitchtrap entering the real world, then we're surrounded by nightmare staff bots, and we're put out of commission. Our next vision is from a staff bot as it's handing Cassie the mask, passing on the Vanny persona to Cassie. But if instead of doing your tasks, you listen to Mystic Hippo's weird hints about doing side jobs, you slowly collect poppets for each of the main animatronics. If you do that, eventually you're given a coin that can activate the Princess Quest 4 machine. We then play it, and at the end of it, Vanny appears, seems to crush Glitchtrap in front of us and leave us trapped inside forever. So, as many people, myself included, asked immediately after playing this, what the hell is happening? What do these endings even mean? And which ending is canon? Upon reflection, I think they both are. I might have missed somebody else talking about this, so if someone else has brought this up before, feel free to tell me in the comments below. I'd love to shout out that video. But as far as I'm aware, no one's pointed this out. I didn't even clock it until a year after the game came out, and I've been poring over this game footage since then. But does this ending look a little familiar? It should, because this animation is frighteningly similar to the ending we mentioned at the beginning of this video from Help Wanted 1, where Glitchtrap takes over Vanessa's mind. If this is the same animation, Vanny isn't just using us and leaving us there. Vanny is taking over the protagonist's mind. There's been one major question since Ruin came out, and it's if Vanny is destroyed or left to do something else after Security Breach, why is there so much Vanny graffiti in the Ruin location? How would she be doing that? We finally have our answer. It was Cassie's dad's body with Vanny's mind. Think about what Help Wanted 2 is showing us as a narrative experience. Cassie's dad is looking into what's going on with the Pizzaplex and trying to save it, and in doing so, he's using this Vanny mask. But as he's doing this, the mask starts taking him in odd direction. Instead of just completing his job and looking into things, he gets this inkling that he should go to the food stand and throw out all the Chica items, or go to Foxy's log ride and start shooting specific targets, all the while collecting these strange digital artifacts while wearing the mask. But once we've collected all those pieces, we're able to confront the darkness. We just have to listen to what this mask is telling us. Just like Help Wanted, when collecting all the cassette tapes allows you to confront Glitchtrap. But when we do this, we find out what we were doing wasn't what we set out to do. We didn't save the Pizzaplex. We put some pieces back together and made ourselves vulnerable to Vanny. In that moment, she fully takes over our mind, and Cassie's dad becomes the next Vanny. But Help Wanted 2 isn't over yet. As Vanny/Cassie's dad, we continue to finish our tasks to achieve an ultimate goal. And whatever it actually is in the real world, the Vanny mask sees it as bringing Glitchtrap to the real world, opening that charging pod and showing his hand there. And once that's done, Cassie's dad is no longer a useful host. They need a new one. So they trick Cassie into entering the Pizzaplex and give her the mask, moving the Vanny persona to Cassie, setting up our next major villain. Even if Vanny is not in Vanessa, it doesn't mean Vanny's gone after one game. Vanny is an identity that can take over the mind of anyone it gets its hands on. This is what Ruin and Help Wanted 2 and Secret of the Mimic are building up to. Steelwool and Scott learned from the backlash of Security Breach, when they introduced Burntrap and the Blob at the very end of the game to utter confusion. While it was a cool moment, many fans just didn't know what was going on. Scott and the Steelwool team learned that they need to introduce and flesh out their villains so that when they have these grand reveals, we're not lost at sea, we know what's going on. That's what these past two games and the next game are doing, establishing the villains of this upcoming era, showing us how Cassie got the way she is and how she can be freed, showing us what the Mimic is and what its secret is. These villains are being set up and fleshed out in these games, so when we get this next big game, we know what's coming for us. At least I think so. I understand that some people don't think that Cassie is going to be the next Vanny, but I really think this parallel is too big to ignore, so if you disagree with me, I'd love to know what you think this means in the comments below. I finally solved Help Wanted 2, but not only that. In making this theory, I know what the game after Secret of the Mimic is going to be about. I'm not kidding. Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. Help Wanted 2 as a game is simple and confusing. A lot of us understood the majority of about it upon release, because on the surface, the overarching story is fairly straightforward, so much so that most FNAF fans agree as to what's going on, and FNAF fans agreeing is a big ask. A worker at the Pizzaplex, likely Cassie's dad, is slowly being corrupted by the Vanny mask while working at the Pizzaplex. But while the premise is simple enough, the more questions you start asking, the more confusing the game gets. When exactly is this game taking place, as we see points before and after Security Breach? What is the goal of Glitchtrap in this game? How do we visit Sister Location and Fall Fest if we're at the Pizzaplex? What is actually going on in Help Wanted 2? Well, to understand the performance, we need to meet the Puppet Master, who's behind Help Wanted 2. And personally, I think it comes down to two individuals, Vanny and Dr. Rabbit. This theory is sort of a part 2 to my last FNAF theory on Gregory's timeline. I'll link it here because you really should watch it first, but I understand some of you don't want to. So to very briefly just go over the essentials. Glitchtrap is an entity we've known since Help Wanted, this rabbit. I believe he's a manifestation of the Mimic 1 program, the same programming inside of the Mimic at the end of Ruin. This program commands it to replicate what it observes. I believe the evidence we have now suggests that the Mimic's programming was taken and inputted into Help Wanted, and that Mimic programming that's been with the franchise since its inception, if 1979 is to be believed, is now being trained on essentially a montage of the worst moments of Fazbear's history. This manifests as Glitchtrap, a program that wants to recreate the horrible deeds that William Afton did. But in order to do that, it needs to be outside of the game, so it tries to escape through a video game tester's mind, Jeremy. Jeremy proves too resilient though, and uses a paper slicer to get out of the headset. His next target is another game tester, Vanessa, one who he slowly creeps into the mind of until eventually she gives in. But what is actually happening here? Is a program possessing a human? I don't think so. My best guess as to how this possibly works is that Glitchtrap as a program can replicate itself. We see something like this in all of the technology and animatronics at the Pizzaplex, where all of them are corrupted in some way and display Glitchtrap in different moments. So if Glitchtrap is controlling all of this technology at once, what seems more likely? This one program is simultaneously running the entire Pizzaplex, or this one program has made copies of itself throughout all of the technology, and those copies can communicate to each other. I think logically the second one makes more sense. So instead of Glitchtrap as a singular program controlling the movements of all of the technology in the Pizzaplex, Glitchtrap makes a copy of itself and inputs that to the machinery. That way each animatronic, in a way, is piloted by Glitchtrap, and they can communicate within each other. So if we extend that logic to Vanny, I believe that in a way, Vanny is Glitchtrap. Vanny is an iteration of Glitchtrap. Glitchtrap took its programming and dataset and replicated it within the programming of the mind of Vanessa, creating the Vanny persona. That way she could be his servant in the real life to facilitate a proper host for Glitchtrap to be put into. But while Vanny is Glitchtrap, she's not the Glitchtrap, or as I'll refer to make things easier, Glitchtrap Prime. You following so far? Because Vanny also needed help. She was busy doing the experiments to create a host that Glitchtrap could enter, so she needed someone to conceal those experiments and protect herself. I believe she used the Vanny mask to slowly corrupt the mind of Gregory, a boy who was obsessed with the arcades at the Pizzaplex until eventually his mind was taken over as well, Glitchtrap iterating inside of it, creating the Dr. Rabbit persona, the one that we see in the Tales from the Pizzaplex story GGY. Again, all of this is in the last FNAF theory, but TLDR, I believe that Vanny and Dr. Rabbit are iterations of Glitchtrap that exist within their hosts, Vanessa and Gregory, but by the end of Security Breach, both Dr. Rabbit and Vanny were removed from their hosts. But since in B7-2 we get evidence that even though a persona can be removed from its host, it doesn't destroy the persona. That persona then just seeks a new host. So using that logic, Vanny and Dr. Rabbit are not gone. They are just in search of a new host. But how do we get to Help Wanted 2 from here? Well, we have to look at the beginning of Security Breach, as Help Wanted 2 likely takes place around the same time as Security Breach. Security Breach starts when Glamrock Freddy glitches out on stage and does a safe boot, which incidentally frees him from Glitchtrap's control. And seemingly with the evidence we have and based on my last FNAF theory, at the same time, Gregory is freed from Glitchtrap's control, the Dr. Rabbit persona being removed from his psyche. But what was that inciting incident that caused all of this? Well, like I mentioned in the last FNAF theory, we know from Ruin that Cassie's father worked at the Pizzaplex, loved the Fazbear franchise, and knew what was going on to some extent, because he seemed to know what happened to Glamrock Bonnie, but wouldn't tell Cassie. So a lot of us assumed that he was the one looking into the Pizzaplex, which leads to Help Wanted 2. So knowing that game takes place at the FNAF 6 pizzeria, and knowing that in Security Breach, the good Vanny ending means that if you beat the arcade game linked to a persona, you free the person from that persona, as we see with Princess Quest 3, a timeline starts to form. Especially considering that a Balloon World arcade machine exists in the FNAF 6 pizzeria, and if you visit it in Security Breach, it's already beaten. I'm proposing that the beginning of Help Wanted 2 is Cassie's dad, who has been looking into the weirdness surrounding the Pizzaplex, and winds up at the FNAF 6 pizzeria using his Vanny mask. And when inside, he comes across the Balloon World arcade machine. Other employees have been noting how the arcade machines are starting to act erratically, so finding one this far off the beaten path must mean something, so he decides to beat it. And in doing so, Gregory is suddenly freed from Dr. Rabbit. That starts Security Breach, but that's not where Cassie's dad's story ends. He's still in the FNAF 6 pizzeria looking around and trying to figure out what's going on. Well, Dr. Rabbit needs a new host, and having Glitchtrap's dataset, it knows that it needs to slowly win over the mind of its victim before taking it over. So I believe Dr. Rabbit leads Cassie's dad into using the Vanny mask more and more by posing as Helpy. Now, I hear you. Why Helpy? I was recently on a live-streamed podcast hosted by T-Dreads with a whole bunch of FNAF content creators. Like, literally, too many to directly say, but I'll link the podcast right here. We talked about a whole bunch of different FNAF things, but while we were talking about the Candy Cadet stories, editing Riley, I forgot to summarize the story, and it's like a 4-minute audio if I just play the story straight, so I'm just gonna summarize it here. The story in Help Wanted 2 is that somebody faced off against a witch and got away but was left with a scar on her face. But then, when she's older, she goes back to confront the witch. But at the entrance of the woods, a small boy greets her, and the boy's like, "Oh, I'll help you. Here, take a rest in my house." And she listens to the small boy, and then the story ends with, "The oven door was closed, the witch would have her meal." So the little boy tricked her to falling for the witch. ID's Fantasy had this to say about the Help Wanted 2 story.
Especially since it's another one in the Steel Wool era, I think it's supposed to be about our player character, and the way I interpret it is we're playing as Cassie's dad, and I think he's Help Wanted Jeremy, and that the scar is what happened where he sliced his face. But the thing is, when they mentioned, oh, there's a mask on the floor, it's described as a Halloween mask, and the lights in the room were on. So if Tape Girl was in there and it was just a guy's fleshy face bits, I feel like she would have seen that. But if it was like an actual mask cut off, that could look more like a Halloween mask, and it would be easier to mistake the blood for ink.
Well, also,
I think that Jeremy survived that barely. He wanted revenge on Glitchtrap for what happened to him, even though he managed to escape. And so he comes back to Fazbear Entertainment as a technician, but through the Vanny mask, Helpy or whatever, lures him to the place and gets him stuck. And then he dies.
Yeah,
Yeah,
also,
ultimately,
Go
the
ahead.
light bulb I put together for a recent video was that little boy is, if that's the case, that little boy is definitely Helpy, which I think a lot of people would like miss at first, but you look at Ruin, that's your little guide boy, and he's luring you straight into the oven.
This line of thinking convinced me of two things. First of all, I had not believed for a long time that Jeremy from Help Wanted survived his encounter with Glitchtrap, but placing Jeremy as the woman in the woods from these stories, suddenly that becomes incredibly plausible. The idea that he encountered Glitchtrap once and escaped while scarring himself, and encountered Glitchtrap a second time falling for the trap. After all, Help Wanted 2 only has bad endings for the player. That makes a lot of sense, and I think I do believe now that Cassie's dad is Jeremy from Help Wanted and the player from Help Wanted 2. But more importantly for this theory, the boy in the woods. A lot of people believe that boy to be Helpy, a friendly face that leads us astray. But if that's true, there's an interesting bit of logic here. If the witch is Glitchtrap, then the boy can't be, right? So Helpy can't be Glitchtrap Prime. So in that case, who is Helpy? Well, that only leaves Vanny or Dr. Rabbit. And Vanny is seemingly too busy dealing with security breach. Not to mention, if it was Dr. Rabbit's arcade machine that was beaten, he would be the first to know. Especially if Dr. Rabbit was the one who encoded themselves in these arcade machines, as I said in my last theory. So that's my argument for Help Wanted 2. It's the story of Dr. Rabbit seeking a new host in Jeremy, Cassie's dad, in order to continue the work of Glitchtrap. All of these tasks are just to get Cassie's dad to wear the Vanny mask for longer stretches of time, especially the ones that don't make sense temporally. If the Vanny mask is able to show us distorted AR versions of the Pizzaplex, it's likely able to show us VR versions of anything. These Fallfest and Sister Location tasks are likely just trained off of the Mimic's dataset, things that it's seen in the past. But it's making up this task so that Cassie's dad wears the mask for longer stretches of time to worm his way into his brain. And it eventually works. We see in the main ending that if you listen to Helpy and follow all of your tasks, eventually Glitchtrap exits from a charging pod. And like I mentioned earlier, Dr. Rabbit and Vanny are just iterations of Glitchtrap. What I think we're seeing in this moment is Dr. Rabbit entering the mind of Cassie's dad. After all, if Vanessa or Gregory weren't suitable enough hosts for Glitchtrap Prime, why would Cassie's dad be? And that's the story of Help Wanted 2. But that's not all there is it? Because there's a whole other ending in this game, one that's centered around Vanny. So what about Vanny? Help Wanted 2 shafted Vanny. Dr. Rabbit's defenses didn't work. Not only did Gregory get freed of Dr. Rabbit in the first place, but it put the whole thing in jeopardy, and Gregory himself freed Vanessa of Vanny. And to top it all off, Dr. Rabbit is about to take the very next suitable host that they find. Vanny made Dr. Rabbit. He exists to serve Vanny to serve Glitchtrap. And now he's usurping her? A persona that in his words in GGY is Glitchtrap's favorite. No way. This is too much. Vanny can't let this happen. So during Help Wanted 2, while Dr. Rabbit is trying to take over Jeremy's mind, Vanny starts leading Jeremy astray, promising that there's something deeper going on, the thing he's been looking for, if he just looks a little harder, leaving him these breadcrumbs until eventually he finds Princess Quest 4. At this point, there are two timelines here. In one of them, Jeremy listens to Vanny, following her hints until eventually ending up in Princess Quest 4. And once his mind is ripe for the picking, Vanny reaches in and plucks out Dr. Rabbit, that iteration of Glitchtrap, and crushes it, destroying it, letting her take over Jeremy's mind instead. Now I hear you. That's Glitchtrap being crushed there. Even in the FNAF Steelwool interview, when talking about this ending, J-Top said this.
And being, this is, you know, the end of Glitchtrap.
Yeah. So it is the end of Glitchtrap. Squished. Gone.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And I've been really thinking about that. At the time this interview came out, Help Wanted 2 was the most recent FNAF game. And if this were true, and J-Top is just saying what the ending means, this would be unprecedented. This would be the first time in FNAF history that someone who worked on these games came out in an official Scott-approved forum and said, oh, here's exactly what this ending means. So I thought that was unlikely. But at the same time, I don't think he's lying, because that would be equally unprecedented. The lore is hard enough to solve. The last thing we need need, and I think Scott understands this, is someone officially coming down and just lying, because that would mess with so much. But now, I'm thinking that J-Top wasn't lying, he wasn't telling the full truth. Dr. Rabbit and Vanny are iterations of Glitchtrap. In a way, they are Glitchtrap. So if Dr. Rabbit is the one dying in this ending, then J-Top didn't lie at all. That's the end of Glitchtrap, that specific iteration of Glitchtrap. Glitchtrap Prime is still safe waiting for his suitable host. All the same, I don't think this ending is the canon one. After all, the other ending is what leads us to the beginning of Ruin, something we know does happen. And in that ending, Jeremy listens to Dr. Rabbit and Dr. Rabbit enters Jeremy's mind. But that's not the full ending cutscene, is it? We see Glitchtrap begin to emerge from the pod, but suddenly we cut to Jeremy being attacked by a bunch of staff bots, and then the game just ends. And suddenly after, we're looking for a new host in Cassie. If the process worked, wouldn't Jeremy already be the host? Why would they even need Cassie? What exactly is happening here? Well, if you remember the story B72 from Tales from the Pizzaplex, not only does it teach us that personas can be removed from their host without being destroyed, it also tells us how they can be destroyed. In the ending of that story, the main character's grandmother accepts that persona and its mechanics, letting it possess her, because once it does, she dies, and she wants to take it with her. We learn that if you kill the host while the persona is still in that host's mind, it kills them both. This taking of center stage by Dr. Rabbit is too much for Vanny. Vanny is Glitchtrap's #1 assistant, always has been and always will be. So once Dr. Rabbit entered Jeremy's mind, claiming this new host to continue Glitchtrap's legacy, Vanny did what Vanny does best, and what Vanny has done throughout the entirety of Security Breach. She sent the staff bots after him.
Disassemble Freddy.
Ripping Jeremy's body to pieces, and in the process, destroying the Dr. Rabbit persona. But now we're back to square one. Actually, worse than square one. Sure, it's just Vanny and Glitchtrap again, but now the Pizzaplex is in disrepair, the animatronics are going haywire, and the Mexis security system is unsolvable. Dr. Rabbit was the one who modified the Mexis machine to protect and conceal the Mimic, according to my last theory. And without him, they can't figure it out. They need another host, someone from the outside, to work their way outside in to take care of it. And now knowing that if the host dies, the persona dies with it, Vanny is careful about this next one, and calls for Cassie. Thus we have Ruin, where Vanny is using the Vanny mask to slowly take over Cassie's mind, just like Help Wanted 2, exposing Cassie to the Vanny mask over time, tricking her to use it as much as possible, but waiting until all the security systems have been disabled to finally take over her mind. Once Mexis is fully shut down and the Mimic is freed, then Vanny steps in, giving Cassie's consciousness this fake scene of bliss and happiness so she can take the reins. And then Vanny goes to work, freeing Glitchtrap's new host, the Mimic. But I'm not done yet. We just explained Help Wanted 2 and Ruin, but I said we'd predict the next game after Secret of the Mimic, and that I will. Well, technically I already have, because it just kind of goes back to what I've been saying for a while now. I think this theory really goes along with it, that now we have Glitchtrap in the Mimic, who can be any animatronic, and Vanny in Cassie. That duo can continue William Afton's legacy, where the Mimic is able to kill the children and do these remnant experiments, while Cassie is the bait, a child who can go to other children and be like, hey, do you want to go backstage and meet the animatronics personally? I know a secret. And since Gregory, Vanessa, and Freddy's head are the only people who could possibly know about this at this point, they're the ones who feel it their duty to go and stop it. But we'll have to see if that's at all accurate when we get a trailer for this game way long after Secret of the Mimic comes out. I want to apologize. This is possibly one of my most lore-dense FNAF theories I've ever made, and I had to assume you guys knew a lot of in-depth stuff, especially just my theories in general, specifically mine. Typically, my job as a FNAF theorist is to make a palatable version of theories so that anyone, even casual fans, fans can easily understand these videos. But frankly, this theory is so entrenched upon theory after theory and speculation built off of other speculation that if I broke it down so everything was fully explained so that any casual fan could enjoy it, it'd be like 50 minutes long, and I don't have time to do that. So unfortunately, I made this in a way where it's probably only palatable to the very intensely dedicated FNAF fans out there. So this one's for you, and I do apologize for any casual fans I've lost along the way, and I don't mean casual as an insult. If anything, this is just an example that myself and the like need to touch more grass. But if you want a more readily accessible theory that's still pretty intense, might I recommend this one. But truthfully, if you consider yourself more of a casual fan, let me know in the comments if this was understandable at all.
I've been wrong about Help Wanted 2 so much it's crazy. 8 months ago, I made a video convinced that I'd finally cracked it, and 6 months ago, I made a video amending that to where it's still kind of the same thing but with new players involved, including some of the ideas about the chain of mimics, and I still like those ideas and I think they're possible, but after the release of Secret of the Mimic, and in tandem, Mimic Custody, I think a much simpler solution is right in front of us, and it has to do with the ongoing battle over the control of the Mimic between Fiona, or M1, and Glitchtrap, or M3. Slices, put on your aprons, and let's bake ourselves a theory. Now, I know I just threw a lot of terminology at you, so let me break down some of that theory jargon. Mimic Custody is admittedly a silly name I made up for the theory that I spent the past 2 weeks covering. The idea that the current story of Five Nights at Freddy's is Fiona and Glitchtrap fighting over the control of the Mimic Endoskeleton. Fiona, or M1, wants M2 and the Mimic Endoskeleton to remain intact because she wants to reset M2 so it can continue to be her son David again. Whereas Glitchtrap wants the body of the Mimic Endoskeleton to enter the real world with, so he wants to wipe M2 from its system. All the while, M2 just wants to be its own thing, so it doesn't want either of them to succeed. So what does that theory have to do with Help Wanted 2? You melting or do you want down? I can't tell if you're like leaned so far off, buddy. Well, Help Wanted 2 is interesting in this context because it is simultaneously the most and least confusing FNAF game that we've ever gotten. On the surface, the main plot of the game isn't that difficult to get to. We're playing as Cassie's dad, trying to figure out what's going on at the Mega Pizzaplex, but in doing so, we're manipulated, tricked, used, and killed. That's all pretty easy assumptions to make based on the evidence we have in front of us. Granted, none of that's confirmed, but that's the part of Help Wanted 2 that pretty much 99% of people agree on. However, no one can seem to agree on the details, the parts in which this game get really weird. Things like, why are we collecting Voltron-style Fazbear toys? And why is it that when we do that, Glitchtrap seems to materialize in the real world? Is any of what we're seeing in this game real at all? Why is Glitchtrap handing us the things that lead to his demise? Why does Vanny kill Glitchtrap? There's never been a super clean explanation for any of this. And even though I've got an idea I'm really confident in, I admit it's not without its holes. Frankly, the last theory I had on Help Wanted, which I was still super confident in, had plenty of holes too. Previously, I thought this game was a fight between Vanny and GGY, the Glitchtrap personas within Vanessa and Gregory respectively. I thought by the time of Help Wanted 2, both of those personas were removed from Vanessa and Gregory, but still existed and were fighting over control of what happens next. I still think that theory has a lot of merit, but in a post-Secret of the Mimic world, I do still think Help Wanted 2 is showing us a battle between two forces. I just think the players have changed. But honestly, could you blame me? Until Secret of the Mimic came out, I didn't even think Fiona was going to be relevant in Five Nights at Freddy's. I mean, she's barely relevant in the story of the Mimic, so I think that's fair. I think, instead, Help Wanted 2 is showing us a possible climax to the battle between Fiona, or M1, and Glitchtrap, or M3, over the body of M2, the Mimic Endoskeleton they're both trying to get their hands on. So who's on what side and what ultimately happens during this game? Well, there's two endings. In one of them, Glitchtrap is seemingly crushed and destroyed forever. And in the other ending, Glitchtrap is seemingly materializing in the real world. So if Glitchtrap is behind one of the endings, I'm gonna go with the one where he lives, which frankly is the easier ending of the two to explain. The main ending of the game sees Glitchtrap exiting a charging pod to a hard cut of several staff bots trying to kill us, to another cut of the perspective of MaskBot handing the Vanny mask to Cassie. So what's going on here? Is Glitchtrap literally materializing in the real world? I don't think so. I think this is a metaphor for Glitchtrap entering the Vanny mask, likely the one we're currently wearing.
Essentially, we're wearing the Vanny mask, Glitchtrap enters it and then has us killed, so then we can take this mask and give it to someone to infect. But if that's the case, how did this come about? How did he manage to enter that mask? Well, that comes down to how we access this ending, which is just playing the game normally. We listen to the projector helpy and we do the task presented in front of us, and occasionally we're presented a present, each one being a different Phas Force figure, those Voltron-like action figures I mentioned at the beginning of the video. When we collect all 6, the main 4 Freddy's gang, Golden Freddy / Fredbear, and the puppet, we get one more present, the combined figure, because all of them can combine into this creature, which, yes, I think deserves to be talked about why it looks so similar to that costume the Mimic put on, but I don't have time to get into that today. But once we do that, we hard cut to the ending, the thing I just mentioned. Glitchtrap appears, we get killed, we see Cassie being handed the mask. This all seems fairly self-explanatory even without Secret of the Mimic. I don't think I'm breaking any ground here with this analysis. This version of Helpy is likely Glitchtrap, and it's stringing us along saying, if you listen to us, you'll be able to fix everything, but in listening to it, we're putting him back together. Just like in Help Wanted 1, Glitchtrap apparently needs to be gathered before he can materialize, and that's what we're doing here. We're putting him back together so he can materialize into the mask. Even with Secret of the Mimic in mind, Glitchtrap being a variant of the Mimic doesn't really change any of this analysis. He still needs a body to get to the desired Mimic endoskeleton. So if this is all mostly the same with or without Secret of the Mimic, why am I making this video? Well, that comes down to the second ending, the weird one. In the other ending, we listen to a different voice, collect poppets, go to Princess Quest 4, and watch Vanny kill Glitchtrap in front of us. That's wild. This is an insane ending. However, taking it as a whole, if this ending is destroying Glitchtrap, and we know there's 2 major players going on, then it seems most likely that this ending is being controlled or manipulated by Fiona, or M1. And although on the surface that seems fairly straightforward, this is the ending that always stumps theories a little bit, and frankly it does to this theory too. While the idea of Fiona trying to destroy Glitchtrap makes sense, how does Vanny get involved in any of it? Well, at least the process of getting this ending, I think, is incredibly clear in a post-Secret of the Mimic world. The key to understanding this is how you access the secret ending in Help Wanted 2. The fact that you have to follow the vague hints to do secrets in the minigames. The interesting part of that being how those hints are delivered to the player. The first time you play a minigame that has a secret in it, Mystic Hippo tells you that you've received a message. The message being graffiti near one of the spots in the pizzeria. Mystic Hippo is a strange character, one that we meet for the first time in this game, and she is an absolute diva. But all of the secret advice comes from her. So throughout the game, a stationary voice is giving advice to us on how to access one of the endings. How interesting is it then that the very next game has M1 pretending to be Dispatch, a stationary voice giving us directions on how to access an ending. Now, just that connection would be too loose for a theory, but it doesn't stop there. Consider the Help Wanted 2 pizzeria. Everything inside of it is Fazbear merchandise. Frankly, most of it is stuff we've seen before, but now in 3D. We get these posters of things we've seen before, toys we've seen before. I mean, they even have both of the drink clowns. But then we have Mystic Hippo, something we've never seen before that frankly might not even be a Fazbear character. She's a lot closer to Mr. Hippo from the Mediocre Melodies, which aren't Fazbear characters. And maybe she was a part of Fall Fest, after all she's next to the carousel and she fits the theming, but even still, to us, she's a brand new character. But not only is she this older new character we hadn't heard of, Secret of the Mimic tells us that Mystic Hippo is a Murray's Costume Manor original. We have this poster in the back of the Big Top showroom, one of Mystic Hippo, an area that's lacking any Fazbear branding. This is showing us that Mystic Hippo was a Murray's Costume Manor original character, and knowing the workflow of MCM, that would have likely meant that she was designed originally by Fiona. So now looking at this Help Wanted 2 ending, we get access to it by listening to a Fiona-designed Murray's Costume Manor character who's giving us hints in a similar fashion to how M1 does in Secret of the Mimic. And if we listen to it, it destroys Glitchtrap. The idea that Fiona is speaking to the player through Mystic Hippo is so direct, it's basically not even an implication anymore. But then, if Fiona is the one giving us these instructions, why is it that Glitchtrap is the one who hands us the poppets when we complete a secret? So, admittedly, this stumped me for a while. I've heard plenty of explanations on why Glitchtrap is handing us these plushies. One of them being that it wasn't originally intended, that the original game had Vanny handing it to us and it was changed. But if it was changed, then it was changed and we need to address that. Now, there hasn't been any new evidence or new discoveries that prove what I'm about to say is true, but I have settled on, I think, pretty sound logic in my interpretation of Help Wanted 2. We know that collecting these poppets, whatever they really are, allow us to destroy Glitchtrap, and we know that they exist in this space. So whatever they are, Glitchtrap would likely know about them too. And if he did, I think it would make a lot of sense if he's the one who hid them in the first place. This kind of goes into what I think Help Wanted 2 actually is in the timeline. Are we literally doing all of these tasks, or are we simply going through a computer and reviewing security logs? Well, personally, I think it's a bit of a blend of both, but the gameplay itself of Help Wanted 2, I think is much more literal than I've been giving it credit for. In Help Wanted 2, we are standing in front of a console wearing a Vanny AR mask, and we're accessing files on that console. Is it not possible that that's literally all we're doing? We're standing at this console, we activate a file, and our AR mask changes the world around us so we can interact within that file. Essentially going through the cyberspace of the Pizzaplex to rout out whatever virus is ruining it. All of these minigames could be exactly that, representations of files we're going through in this Pizzaplex. And if that's true, the Poppets have a very clear explanation to what they are now. Glitchtrap took his vulnerabilities, these Poppets, regardless of whatever they literally are, they represent his vulnerabilities, and he took them and hid them as deep in the coding of the Pizzaplex as possible, in obscure locations that only he would know how to figure out. So when we access these Poppets, we're accessing something that Glitchtrap purposely hid. It's his program. So when we retrieve it, the hand that gives it to us is Glitchtrap. Am I saying that Glitchtrap himself is handing these to us? No. But I think the program he created is him holding on to them. So whether literally or metaphorically or visually analog-wise, we are seeing Glitchtrap's hand holding the plushie, because he's the one holding it there in the first place. Is there any direct evidence to tell us this is the case? Of course not. Welcome to Five Nights at Freddy's. But I do think logically this makes a lot of sense. So if that's the case, how does Vanny get into all of this? This is admittedly the weaker part of the theory I talked about earlier. Vanny being here is so strange, and we still have absolutely no evidence as to why she's involved in killing Glitchtrap if she's supposed to be the reluctant follower. Now, there is the whole concept that is introduced in The Flesh, where iterations of a program would kill older versions of them. But like, if that was something Vanny always wanted to do, why didn't she do it until now? That's the weird bit. So, like always, when we have no evidence here, we have to do some assuming. And I would hate to make an ass out of you and Ming, but we kind of have to here. The timeline placement of Help Wanted 2 is a little tricky considering all the different spots of the timeline we see within the minigames. But taking our previous interpretation of Help Wanted 2, again, the idea that we're just going through this monitor, then it seems fairly obvious that this game takes place after Security Breach, but before Ruin. And I still think Ruin is telling us that the canon ending of Security Breach is the Princess Quest Good Vanny ending. After all, in that ending, Freddy is beaten to a pulp and his head is removed because it's still functional, the Princess Quest arcade machine is beaten, and Freddy's head, Gregory, and Vanessa all leave the Pizzaplex safely. And then we get to Ruin, where Freddy's body is beaten and headless in the same spot it was left. The Princess Quest arcade machine is toppled over with a digital sword in it, showing that it's been beaten, and Gregory, Vanessa, and Freddy's head are nowhere to be found within the Pizzaplex. This seems very clear to me, but it also seems that Gregory and Vanessa have been busy at work, still trying to take down Glitchtrap and save everybody. If the walkie-talkie conversation we get near the end of Ruin is actually Gregory talking to us, then that would mean that Gregory knows what's going on and knows the cave layout, likely because him, Vanessa, and Freddy's head are still actively trying to stop Glitchtrap from taking over the Pizzaplex and killing a bunch of kids. All this to say, I think that after Security Breach, it's likely that Gregory, Vanessa, and Freddy's head escape the Pizzaplex, but are still working to stop Glitchtrap. It's in character for what we hear them say in-game, and it makes a lot of sense if they're still working toward that goal by Ruin. So during Help Wanted 2, they would likely be working towards that goal. So if Fiona was able to get into contact with Vanessa, then the Help Wanted 2 secret ending makes a lot more sense. But in order for that to make sense,
we need to make two very big assumptions, which is the weaker part of this theory. I think that William Afton ran a lot of tests on M1 and M2 throughout the years after obtaining them through buying Murray's Costume Manor. And to do that, he moved them to the sister location bunker to better control their variables. Let's look at the underground layout of MCM. We have research and development directly connected via tunnel to the underground labs beneath the Murray's mansion. Knowing that Afton takes over all of this post-Edwin, I think it's incredibly likely that Afton renovated these spaces to become the FNAF 4 house overtop the sister location bunker connected to the R&D facility, which later down the line becomes the pizzeria simulator. I think it becomes FNAF 4 in between that, but we won't get into that right now. But regardless, it doesn't take a huge leap to assume that all of this is connected. So the big assumption isn't that Afton renovated these spaces. The first assumption is that William Afton moved the F10N4 device into the sister location bunker. Physically, he could have, but it's still an assumption we have no evidence for. But if he did that, that sets up the second half of this theory. The other big assumption you have to make, that after the events of Security Breach, Gregory, Vanessa, and Freddy's head, in trying to stop Glitchtrap for good, found the old FNAF 4 house and went down into the sister location bunker. On the surface, this is an insane idea, but luckily with some evidence that have come out, this isn't as big of an assumption to make anymore. This photo can be found around the secret ending of Secret of the Mimic, the one where you revert M2 back into David, and it's a photo of the Mimic and David sitting on a hill looking at the factory. Now, many people have made this connection, and in fact, on stream, Tedra's pointed this out to me, that this photo we can find the location of. Looking at the Murray's Costume Manor from the parking lot, you can see that there's a tree next to it. But if you go out of bounds and put the camera behind the tree facing the factory, it's the exact same angle. This tree on a hill is where the Mimic and David were sitting looking at the factory. Now here's where it gets funky. If we take the Brazil ending, or frankly any of the Security Breach endings featuring this tree, and line up these photos and locations, this spot that many Security Breach endings feature is the same tree on the same hill, including the Good Vanny ending, where Gregory, Vanessa, and Freddy's head are resting after escaping the Pizzaplex and being free of Glitchtrap's control. This piece of evidence has been used in a lot of different ways. I know it's one of the key parts of God David, but in this theory, this photograph is showing us that if the Good Vanny ending is canon, then when they escape, the first place they go to relax is sitting directly next to the old FNAF 4 house. This house and tree that was Murray's Costume Manor but was converted into the FNAF 4 house is right next to the Pizzaplex, and that's where they're sitting in the epilogue of the game. So the idea that in trying to stop Glitchtrap, I don't know if you can hear that, but that's crazy. So the idea that after they escape, in trying to beat Glitchtrap, they go into this abandoned building and find out it's connected to the Pizzaplex isn't that big of a stretch. Especially if Vanessa remembers any of her time as Vanny, this likely would have come up. But that is the second big assumption we need to make here. So, if both of those admittedly large assumptions are true, then we have a group of characters trying to stop Glitchtrap who soon encounter an AI robot whose entire mission statement right now is to delete Glitchtrap so her son can be recreated. So the idea that Vanessa would accept the help of Fiona and they would work together to thwart Glitchtrap makes a lot of sense. And if so, wouldn't the most advantageous position for Vanessa to be in would be the man on the inside, appearing to still be Vanny. Maybe Vanny was destroyed when Princess Quest 3 was beaten, but as Glitchtrap's gathering his information, he sees Vanny re-enter the program, almost like she was not deleted. But in actuality, it's Vanessa pretending to still be the loyal follower in order to wait until Glitchtrap is at his most exposed and vulnerable to pluck him out of the code and crush him. I think that makes a lot of sense. So the TLDW is that Help Wanted 2 is showing us one of the possible turning points into this ongoing feud. Fiona and Vanessa working together to pull away one of Glitchtrap's next victims, just enough to leave Glitchtrap exposed so they could destroy him, but it didn't work. I still think the canon ending to Help Wanted 2 is the main one. After all, it's the one that leads directly into Ruin. So then what is this ending telling us? Well, it might just be telling us how Glitchtrap could be defeated. So when we get to the next game featuring him, we know what to do. But let me know what you think, because this one is definitely more logic and assumption based than direct evidence. But we're not gonna have direct evidence for a lot of this until like 1 or 2 more games come out, so take it or leave it. When Secret of the Mimic came out, all of us were scrambling to figure out exactly what Edwin Murray invented instead of William and Henry. And nearly a year later, I think we've settled on what he did and didn't invent. Well, almost. Because there's something that isn't even confirmed to exist in the games that Edwin Murray may have invented. The exact same thing that Vanny uses to conceal herself and Security Breach. I'm not kidding. Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. So let's reel it back for a moment. Am I talking about illusion discs? Kind of, but why the hell would Edwin have invented an illusion disc? When would he have done it? Isn't he dead? Frankly, before the Silhouette update, I would have agreed with you that Edwin Murray is most likely dead. But as I covered in this video, which you can go watch and probably should, Steel Wool silently added something crazy in a recent patch of Secret of the Mimic. It was an otherwise normal patch, but for no reason, and without saying so in the update, they added this human-shaped silhouette that moves back and forth in the window of the Digityper office when looking through the security office on the other side of the warehouse. Yeah, it's that weirdly specific, and it only appears at the very beginning and very end of the game. So it can't be the Digityper, and it likely can't be M2, because it would have to go from there to the van. I explained this in the video. Realistically, the only options for this silhouette are a brand new character or Edwin Murray. But something that I pointed out in that video is if Edwin did survive the attack at his office and he's somehow snooping around the facility, he would have to avoid M2 and M1. M2 is something that is able to find us within our first hour of the factory, and M1 is so attached to the security system that the only time she mentions losing contact with us is when we leave the building during the Big Top fight. So how is he able to avoid this killer sleuth and the security system of the factory? Frankly, in that video, I left it at that there's no good explanation for that, but Edwin might have survived. But later, I got an anonymous email to the Freddy Fazbear Pizza podcast, the weekly podcast I have on this very channel. And it read, if we assume Edwin is still around at MCM during Secret of the Mimic, is it possible that he coded some way to make himself invisible to the machines inside, similar to how Vanny is invisible to Freddy in Security Breach? At the moment, I'm Edwin agnostic, but the biggest problem at the moment is how M1 could not know that Edwin is in the facility. Given that Glamrock Freddy is made of mimic coding, it stands to reason that a similar tactic could work with the original mimics. I talked about that briefly on the podcast. I thought it's really interesting and worth bringing up. But I thought about it more recently, and if he coded himself to be invisible to M1 and M2 with some device, there is only one thing in all of Five Nights at Freddy's we know capable of doing something like that: Charlotte Emily's earpieces from the Silver Eyes novels. So is that why I think Edwin has illusion discs? Before I even get into any of this, we need to go over what Charlie's earpieces are and how they may or may not even relate to illusion discs. So in the second novel, The Twisted Ones, Charlotte Emily is working on a project where she has these 2 robot heads that talk to each other. And to enter that conversation, you need to put an earpiece on for them to even register that you exist. In the third novel, after they've learned about illusion discs and all of this, one of the characters has the idea for Charlotte to rewire the earpiece to instead appear invisible to an animatronic. And she's able to do that. She's able to make an earpiece that essentially makes you completely invisible to any animatronic. Now, a lot of people, myself included, had been mistakenly attributing this to an illusion disc, or at least that she used illusion discs to accomplish this. But I did look back through the book. Maybe I'm mistaken, maybe I'm just missing something, but I can't find any direct link between illusion discs and these earpieces, just that they're happening at the same time. Maybe they get combined at some point and I couldn't find it in my quick reread. Let me know. But even if they're not directly connected in the books, I think for good reason, many of us think they are connected or even are the same piece of technology in the games. Because in the books, an illusion disc works by overloading the human mind, having you fill in what you think should be there, and it's used to make mannequins look fleshy and monstrous, or make Circus Baby look human. But when they do this, they emit a very loud and piercing frequency, and also make you appear fuzzy or glitchy on cameras. And the thing is, all of that, plus all of the earpiece stuff, happens to Vanny in Security Breach all at the same time. In Security Breach, it is established and re-established over and over that Glamrock Freddy cannot see Vanny. It's one of the first things we hear about in the game. In the game, Vanny is able to see Glamrock Freddy, and Glamrock Freddy cannot see Vanny. In the game, Vanny is able to see Glamrock Freddy, and Glamrock Freddy cannot see Vanny. In the game, Vanny is able to see Glamrock Freddy, and Glamrock Freddy cannot see Vanny. In the game, Vanny is able to see Glamrock Freddy, and Glamrock Freddy cannot see Vanny. In the game, Vanny is able to see Glamrock Freddy, and Glamrock Freddy cannot see Vanny. In the game, Vanny is able to see Glamrock Freddy, and Glamrock Freddy cannot see Vanny. In the game, Vanny is able to see Glamrock Freddy, and Glamrock Freddy cannot see Vanny. In the game, Vanny is able to see Glamrock Freddy, and Glamrock Freddy cannot see Vanny. In the game, Vanny is able to see Glamrock Freddy, and Glamrock Freddy cannot see Vanny. In the game, Vanny is able to see Glamrock Fred
What was that?
That is a fountain. A fountain is a decorative reservoir used for discharging water.
Not the fountain. You didn't see the dancing rabbit lady right in front of us?
No, I did not. There is no rabbit at the Mega Pizzaplex. Not anymore.
And it's mentioned in one of the endings. They want you to know that without Roxy's eyes, Glamrock Freddy cannot see Vanessa, or specifically Vanny. And whenever we get nearby Vanny, a ringing noise appears and she's hard to look at. Not to mention in one of the therapy CDs, it's mentioned that there's a hard to make out rabbit-looking figure in one of the security cameras. So a lot of people have assumed that Vanny's using some sort of game version of an illusion disc, one that makes her hard to see on camera, hard to see in person, and invisible to the animatronics. And the tricky thing is, this is combining information about illusion discs and Charlie's earpieces. So it feels like the games have some sort of technology that's kind of both of them in one. And Vanny seems to have her hands on one. So the question is, where did she get it? Either she made it herself, which I guess is possible, but as far as I'm aware, there's never direct mention of Vanny being an inventor. She may be able to code video games, but that's kind of a far jump between that and never before seen robotic technology. So maybe she obtained it. But then where would Vanny have gotten this very rare, very never before heard of technology? Well, she does have access to a workshop underneath the Pizzaplex, the Murray's Costume Manor secret underground pizzeria. So like I said, people have been suspecting for a long time that Vanny is using some sort of illusion disc adjacent technology to navigate the Pizzaplex, doing this so that normal people and animatronics can't see or interrupt her while she's doing what she needs to. But there was never a great explanation for how. She just could. Even Afton invented it and we didn't know until now isn't a great explanation. It feels more like a cop-out answer. When would we have heard about this before? Why does she have one now? Things like that. We know for a fact that Vanessa was working in this underground pizzeria to either revive Afton or do some weird nonsense, who knows what. But Vanny's down there, the exact same location where Edwin Murray was also working. And if Edwin Murray was working throughout the facility and trying to avoid M1 and M2, he would have needed to invent some sort of device that's doing exactly what Vanny's device does. So the idea that he invented some piece of technology that allowed him to be invisible to robots with the mimic coding inside of it lines up pretty perfectly. And if that's true, then many years down the line, Vanny would have access to that same technology since she's wandering those same halls. This not only is completely logical, but it helps us answer one of the weirdest parts about Security Breach: why can't Freddy see Vanny? So, what do you think? I think this is pretty solid. Again, this is one of those theories where there isn't that much evidence for, but logically it all lines up really well. And it gives us another strong connection between the games and one of its associated media, the books.